Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our day of social justice with a special focus on AI, especially for this first session on this Monday morning. This event is hosted by the American Library Association Social Responsibilities Roundtable, or SRRT. SRRT believes that libraries and librarians must center social responsibility by recognizing and helping to solve social problems and inequities to work for the common good. My name is Alicia Collenbell. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be moderating today's session. So before I introduce the speakers, I'm going to review some housekeeping. To enable captions, please click More in the bottom right of the screen and then click Show Captions. Our session today will be recorded and the recording will be available on our website within a few weeks. Please keep your cameras and mics off unless you are a presenter or posing a question during our Q&A portion. Please be respectful and extend care and compassion to yourselves and others. We will have time for questions and answers after all presentations have been concluded, so please use the Q&A Zoom feature to pose questions and reserve the chat section to relay any tech issues, resources, share-outs, or appreciation for our panelists as they are presenting. You can pop your questions into the Q&A as the presentations are rolling, and you do not need to wait until they are completed with their presentations to do so. This session focuses on policies and practices to promote equity, accessibility, and transparency in AI. Our presenters today are Danielle Hassan, April Sheppard, and Matthew Chase. Danielle Hassan joins us. She is the head of Library IT Services at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. She holds a Master of Library and Information Science from Kent State University and a Master of Science in Information Systems and Security from Our Lady of the Lake University. Her professional focus spans emerging technologies, integrated library systems, discovery platforms, and information literacy. She supports strategic initiatives that enhance access, innovation, and digital engagement across academic library environments. April Sheppard is the Associate Dean of the Library, Arkansas State University. They are also a member of A-State's Artificial Intelligence Policy Committee and currently serve as chair of the university's Diversity and Affirmative Action Committee. They also serve on CERT's Action Council and various other CERT committees. Matthew Chase is the Instructional Services Librarian at Cuyamaca College, and he serves as a member for the Community College League of California's AI work group. He has published and presented work on applying intersectionality in information literacy instruction and evaluating equity within emerging technologies. So welcome to all of our presenters for today, and we will kick off with Danielle. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me this morning. Let me go ahead and get my stuff up to share.
Danielle, you're very quiet.
I will speak louder. Can you hear me good now?
Thank you.
Okay, of course. All right. Give me 1 second. It's loading. Sorry, guys. Give me one thing. Okay. So today I'll be talking to you about equity from the margins, library IT, and the hidden work of AI adaptation. So how I'm going to go about that is I'm going to frame the problem. I'm going to give you a little institutional context about what we do here at UAB Libraries and how our library handled that. We'll go over challenges and invisible labor, and then I'll leave you with some recommendations and takeaways. So framing the problem. Obviously, AI is the guest star of today, and I did utilize it in my presentation. Obviously cited it, but I didn't include my prompts for some of the generation just because they're so long. My email address is at the end, so if you want any of the prompts, feel free to email me to reach out for that. So let's start with the problem. First, we have the arrival, right? AI beaming down from the sky, the future is here. All libraries have to support AI. And then we have our wonderful librarian who is frazzled and getting requests. There's no information about training or ethics or bias, just these requests coming in for support. And, you know, after all the time and being a librarian, we go from crisis to cosmos, we evolve, and we're teaching these AI literacy workshops, right? So between policy and practice, why is this an issue? Well, AI governance is also often centralized, and policy takes a long time to establish. And libraries often have limited to no control over the policy and tools that they are supposed to support. And with that comes a lot of unsupported implementation burden. Ideally, I think one of my slides disappeared. So ideally, you have your AI board or your institution that is delivering policies, and that will filter down to your library IT services team so they can support it accordingly. But what happens when there's no policies or practices in place, and how do libraries have to go about to support it? Well, that's where a lot of the hidden work lies. So to give you some context about our institution here at UAB, it is an R1 institution, and we host a large medical center here. So we serve a wide variety from undergrads to doctors. We serve our faculty as well. We have 3 forward-facing campuses or libraries on our campus that are split up, as well as our special collections, museum, and archives. And we do have a centralized IT unit here. So just so you can know about our differentiation in tech, is our library is responsible for our tech labs. We do have 2 main ones that are rather large. We do our extended reality there, so our VR, our AR, everything like that, our 3D printers, Raspberry Pis, any of the kits we have. We have laptop kiosk, loanable equipment that you would see at user access, like regular laptops, headphones, projectors, things like that. And then we do have some higher powered Alienwares that we manage as well. Our centralized IT covers classroom technology, our printers, and then the laptops that our staff and faculty actually use, which can kind of create a conundrum a little bit of time when people are like, who do we go to? So talking about our university's initial response, I do want to clarify that this was around the end of 2022 to 2023 when the conversation on AI really started to pick up with accessibility. And so how it started to first make its wave around campus, and I say this excluding our divisions like computer sci and our tech departments who are already utilizing it, of course, is it began to be discussed in our faculty senate. And our faculty senate is basically a once monthly meeting, and it's a board that's comprised of a senator from each of our schools. So our libraries do have representation on it. I happen to be the senator for our library at the time. And there was a really big conversation about whether to safeguard or embrace AI, specifically generative AI in the classrooms. Faculty were asking quite a lot about Turnitin and what to do with that. And the university kind of took a hands-off approach for a few months when they weren't sure really to go, and we didn't have any official policy, and it was more left to faculty discretion. It was a lot of refer to the syllabus. If your professor is okay with AI utilization, generative AI utilization, they'll enumerate it in their syllabus, and you kind of need to follow that, because obviously plagiarism was talked about quite heavily. So ideally, right, with our infrastructure, like I talked about earlier, this is how it would work. But since we did not have any of that in place, we were seeing poor user experience initially because we didn't have those policy and practices in place. And a lot of people turned to the library, of course, to get that kind of support. So we had to gear up and initiate a response. So what did that look like? Well, I remember in November of 2022 being there when we got the new release of GPT, and I was talking with my sysadmin who has been here for like 20 plus years. He's amazing. And we were both like, this is going to be disruptive in a big way, and we need to prepare for it. So we actually, he hosted an initial library Gen AI seminar in December, right after that, within a few weeks. And we had attendance from all over campus, doctors, undergrads, graduate students, faculty, all came, and he covered everything from the Turing test to up until current of kind of what we were looking at with AI. He went in to describe the basics of neural networks and kind of how that works, and also posed questions to the audience concerning ethics and copyright. Copyright obviously is very important to us, and it actually led to very good conversation to where our Q&A even went over like 30 minutes of the presentation. And he was asked to speak across campus to give it again to multiple units. In that presentation, we also talked about stable diffusion, just because that's one of the generative resources that we have for image creation. And we had set up in our lab one of our machines running it so that students, faculty, and staff could interact. And we, of course, were having those sourcing discussions on where this data was coming from. The other thing that we did is the team began hosting Read-Only Fridays, which was an informal monthly gathering for library personnel to generate ideas about ways to solve problems or be creative in library work using technology. And AI definitely featured heavily in that. The one other thing that our library did for us is through ALA, they actually paid for and hosted a session from Nicole Henning on AI. And she covered the basics again, of course, but she also talked about academia and tools used, which a lot of our reference librarians really, really enjoyed. So that was the initial wave, right? Obviously, we've evolved quite heavily. That has led into us creating a media literacy librarian position. And we actually created that in 2023 because we did have a real need for that. Because with that being said, our responsibility to our patrons doesn't stop with just providing access. You know, we really need to raise awareness of the tools and materials and ensure that they have the information and skills needed to accurately access the technology and make their own conclusions about its effectiveness in their own lives. So in an effort to provide more training for our library staff and the community at large, we did several workshops, such as navigating social media and ethical content creation, AI in regards to research and teaching impacts in academia. We did tackling online health literacy, since we do have a big med population, and general introductions to AI in academia. We actually wrote a more in-depth paper about the evolution of the academic librarian that came out last month in the Journal of Information Ethics, if you want to check it out. But at the time in 2023, when this position was created, we could only find 5 people in the states that had similar position titles. So I'm really interested to see how that's grown and evolved. The other thing we did is really hone in on collaborations. We worked with our Center for Teaching and Learning. We have AI ethics sessions that we teach. Deep fakes has come up a lot, obviously, with the wave of social media. Distinguishing deep fakes, especially with our student population, has been a popular topic. We work with our business school and our comp sci majors, and then we do give lectures to our biotech students as well. Another thing with our university is that we did initially get an AI working group before those policies were established, since it took months and months and months of having, no guidance, no policies or anything like that. And the working group was comprised of 6 to 7 experts, and we did have representation on that so that we could really leverage for all those voices that needed to be heard. So that was great. So with that, with the lack in policy, people coming to the library, obviously it presents a lot of challenges and invisible labor. Librarians are faced with steep learning curves sometimes, and we're responding to a pressing institutional demand for this AI integration with little to no support or time really to do it. With our instance, our library IT services team was familiar with AI to different varying skill levels, but we were having to translate that and support that within our own faculty and staff so they could carry it further. Consistently, we're being asked to do more with less or the same. I don't know about y'all, but our budgets with policies right now are tight. But that doesn't mean that we stop supporting. So we need to definitely make sure that we're still asking critical questions around policy, bias, and ethics. And a lot of times when these policies aren't established, it's left to the individual staff to navigate without clear guidance, which reinforces this invisibility of this essential labor. So how that translates. So some of those challenges come to light and can be seen in this whole becoming the expert. So with our IT staff who are already familiar, it's being more in depth, right, about that and training our faculty and staff so they in turn can support and be present for our patrons. We do have to design instruction for a wide variety of patrons, from undergrad to doctors, postdocs, everything like that. And there's this emotional burden that can be carried about misinformation or copyright issues and things like that. And with this push for innovation, sometimes it can be unclear. I say that technology is one of the most volatile things, in a way that once you implement and adopt a technology, by the time you do in the system development life cycle, something new is going to be there. And it's a constant thing. So without lack of strategic documentation, clarity, and resources, it all keeps adding on to this hidden work and invisible labor. You can see a few generated cartoons on the right-hand side. I included from my sysadmin that he generates for our library, just with different topics that we have coming out. We try to make it fun for everyone. We have a laptop lottery that we are starting this fall. And obviously we have orientations going on. So he makes these little comics to try to get the conversation still around AI and how you can utilize it and things like that. So just wanted to include that. And so after 2 years, what are we looking like, right? We had the initial wave of uncertainty, not having policies and practices. And finally, our institution gives us some guidelines and resources. They do an AI at Work recess course where they have different episodes featuring tools around AI that can be utilized for work. Our media literacy librarian gave one earlier this month on AI ethics, and I will be giving one later this month on Adobe Firefly. We are a creative cloud institution, so we do support all of that as well. They now have an AI at UAB webpage that's very clear on their tools, their guidance, and more. Our UAB centralized IT does now promote that they offer assistance with AI tools. That's not to say that as librarians, we don't get asked constantly, because we do. And of course, we want to provide that support if we can. And then they do provide guidance on prompting with some generative AI. So recommendations and takeaways from all of this. Well, we have some hard truths to face is that libraries are on the front lines. Whether you view us as cultural centers, resources, tools, we're kind of all of the above. People see us as like a home base to touch, and we're really there to support our patrons in any way that we can. And unfortunately, institutional policy does take time. So we are left with that initial burden. So what do we do about that? How can we increase our equity? And that's the big thing here, is making sure that we have a voice, right? And that we have a voice for others that we serve. So I would definitely recommend to advocate and get involved. This is going to look different for everyone depending on your institution and how your setup is. For us, that looked like Faculty Senate and our AI working group. We also have lovely, lovely reference liaisons who helped us build cross-campus partnerships so we could really make that value and worth of the libraries and the work we do known across campus. And so that kind of helps with our workshops and seminars that we were being asked to give. And obviously capitalize this one, statistics, data for days. All of those workshops we're doing, all of those collaborations, every little single thing that we do, track it, get those numbers, highlight the value of that work that you're doing, and make sure it is accessible, readable. Our dean has access to some dashboards we built that she can show the provost and other people saying, hey, this is what we're doing. The image I included is actually from our annual report last year. And just to give you a little context, so it says, around 22K visits to our technology labs last year. For context, our enrollment's 22K. And while we didn't have one visit per person, when you see it like that, you can see that our students are really utilizing our resources and that we do offer and support value. And then the last point here is that as a library, and our dean holds this initiative too, we really do advocate for literacy as a core, whether that's, media, information, just really honing in on the importance of that. Our freshman student success librarian hones in on that and gets those classes done every time as well, and brings up AI in it as well. So looking forwards towards the future, AI is obviously here to stay. It's been around a long time, even if it wasn't as accessible as it is now. And it can look and be utilized in a bunch of different ways. I know the University of Oxford did a project using Amazon recognition where they extracted metadata from images of their coin collection. And Oxford estimated that they saved 3 years of work in cataloging all 300,000 coins. That was back in 2023. So projects that were once thought of as being insurmountable are now being tackled with AI assistance. But the big thing to note in all this is that we're not on the sidelines of this AI shifts. We are the ones holding the front line. From the margins, we bring critical thinking, ethical grounding, and community care that this moment demands. Our work has always been about access and about justice as librarians, about seeing the whole person and making sure that no one is marginalized. And that is the equity that we truly carry. And if AI is to serve everyone, not just the loudest or the most resourced, then our voices must shape its future, not as an afterthought, but as its foundation. And then we have resources, of course, and that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Our next presenter is April Sheppard.
And Matthew Chase.
And Matthew Chase, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I can get us started, right? Yeah, so thank you, everyone, and yeah, welcome to our session with April here on Tech Justice Now, Confronting AI's Role in Equity and Inequity. And here, this is really a session that's going to be really focusing on the almost like a kind of a balanced pros and cons. That's how we kind of like we're pitching it of about AI's role, especially when it comes to advancing equity or maybe hindering it or reproducing certain inequities as well. So yeah, and also I know in the chat there was some focus on or a really healthy discussion on like the differences between AI and Gen AI. And yeah, our session is going to be really focusing on Gen AI, but you will see those kind of like connections as well to just general state of AI as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for our agenda, yeah, one of the things we really want to kind of have as a guidepost is this concept and theoretical lens of intersectionality, which we'll kind of get into, and specifically how we can utilize that lens with AI. And with that goes into the promises of AI and when it comes to equity. And more specifically, kind of seeing some action points or cases in which there is in which AI is used to address social barriers. And then April will later on take it away with a discussion about the digital divide and more specifically the AI divide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for us, we really wanted to have a really strong, again, guidepost, theoretical framework to kind of help us drive and evaluate AI work, especially in our own respective professions within the information sciences and the library sciences. And then yeah, ultimately incorporating that into our work. And intersectionality seems like a really great fit for because of the fact that it analyzes oppression and privilege across the intersections of race, gender, class, language, ability, and et cetera. And what it that essentially really means is that instead of reducing the discussion of say race as a siloed category, it's really looking at how race can actually seed into issues and complications and relationships when it comes to gender, when it comes to class and language, and also seeing how those other respective categories can influence and impact our experiences with race. One thing to note, though, I always want to stress with this, and especially with the discussion of intersectionality, sometimes it does get reduced in itself, where the discussion of intersectionality often stops with just a discussion about our multiple overlapping identities, just the idea that we have multiple intersecting identities across race and gender and such. But really, what it's really trying to focus on is on the systems of oppression, such as what we can find in education, across healthcare. Technology is another great example, especially with AI, and how these different systems engage with our identities and shape our lived experiences. In the sense that a white cisgender man will have a completely different experience from someone who might be black, trans, disabled, and so on. And honestly, I always like to kind of cornerstone this particular framework with this quote from Audre Lorde. In that quote, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. I think that's a great encapsulation about the anti-siloing of these categories of our lived experiences. Thanks, April. So, with that, we can move into the promises of AI-powered equity, and really, we want to emphasize the idea of a promise because, again, as we're kind of having this really great discussion, is that it's still too early to determine the full impact of how AI is actually advancing equity. We're still in the nascent stages, the infancy of sorts with Gen AI development, even though AI has been here for quite a while. Gen AI is still fairly new. And more particularly, this is something we also want to nail down is this inconsistency when it comes to defining, measuring, and evaluating equity, especially when it comes to our like official policies. Like I think a lot of our respective institutions are still trying to figure out one about our policy with AI, and then also this how that policy relates back to equity. And I think as library professionals, I think that is definitely somewhere where we can really play a part in is really trying to craft a much more clear vision of what exactly we want with AI, and especially when it comes to equity. And then yeah, and then even efforts to advance social equity with AI are still being piloted. In this sense, like there's going to be some examples I'm going to show later on, and a lot of these are going to be either proposed, they're going to be discussed, they're going to be in the research, they might be piloting at the moment. And so, you know, these things are still kind of coming into to development. But yeah, so there are some opportunities though for us to bring intersectional justice into artificial intelligence, especially generative artificial intelligence. One of the concepts actually in the research is inclusive innovation design. This is actually something that's existed well before Gen AI kind of arisen. It's been actually utilized in other areas of technology, but it's the idea of actually involving actively with your target communities in the innovation process itself, incorporating social and environmental sustainability as part of your goals in alignment with the technology's advancement and development and implementation. There's quite a few different examples of how certain communities have gotten involved in the, say, technology that has helped visualize certain environmental impacts, such as air quality, and really having the residents or the community members input in throughout the entire innovation process, which can take longer. But it had much more of a relevant impact on their lived experiences. Unfortunately, right now with Gen AI in particular, we're not really seeing that quite yet. But that's something that we can potentially help try to push forward with. And then other opportunities include equity audits and how AI, and especially Gen AI, is designed and trained, especially with the data that's inputted into these chatbots and other types of technologies. And then April's going to talk about this more in depth later on, but having more inclusive representation within the Gen AI development team composition. There's certain groups such as like Black in AI, which is trying to get more representation, trying to disrupt the status quo of how there are certain racial barriers within the AI workforce ecosystem, and really trying to challenge those. And then ultimately too is like as library professionals ourselves, advocating for equity from vendors incorporating AI technologies, as I'm sure a lot of us are seeing quite a bit of, and I'm doing the same as well. But next slide, please. But yeah, so here's some specific ways and examples of how the research and other practical implementations of how AI and specifically Gen AI is being used to address certain barriers. In this case, with like language barriers, we're seeing things like automatic translation systems to enhance access to content and information, which algorithms have been doing that quite a bit already. But one of the things that with like ChatGPT, with Copilot, and other Gen AI technologies, especially that I'm seeing anecdotally, is how we're kind of using the chatbots as almost like our own personal Star Trek translators, especially with the speech to text features. I've been able to actually work with students and other patrons to be able to actually communicate across like Arabic, which is a very foundational language in my part of the community. And also for those who are maybe, has English as a second language or otherwise trying to learn a different language, a lot of these chatbots and other Gen AI technologies are providing personalized feedback for improving their acquisition of language. Racial barriers, there's actually, I didn't even realize this was a thing until a couple weeks ago, was that Google AI had implemented a skin tone representation filter in their image search user interface. And it's actually adapted from a sociologist's development of a skin tone scale, which is meant to be a lot more accurate of people's variety of skin tones. Another proposed implementation is like analyzing police camera footage to identify racial disparities in law enforcement interactions. Next slide, please. Yeah, so with accessibility and neurodiversity, this in particular, I think we're seeing a lot of development with and a lot more application with, because a lot of the other ones that I've been mentioning are either still in development or being proposed. I think we're seeing a lot more work in this area. Um, and then for example, we might have like real-time speech to text, again, talking about that particular feature, but being very useful for people with motor skill challenges and also even predictive text. So chatbots allowing people with motor skill challenges to be able to compose, written content and just digital content in general. Image recognition for blind and low vision persons. There's actually a free Microsoft app right now for as an example called Seeing AI, where it can actually read out content, digital that exists digitally. There's also like personalized text sizing, color contrasting. This is still kind of more in development type of thing. And then also even AI assisted accessibility efforts. Especially in California, but probably seeing it in other states as well. We're seeing this, higher drive for accessibility within our digital content. And I know several librarians that I know of are using chatbots that are specifically designed and how they were curated to use accessibility standards to revise higher education instruction, like modules, even website content, and so on. There's also even a platform called Mentra that's actually AI powered to help neurodivergent job seekers to match with jobs that match their talents, with their skills, with their experience, and so on. And it even provides personalized feedback on how they can improve their job searching skills. And even voice recognition for people with autism, especially when it comes to supporting them with intonation, and rhythm. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then also across health, socioeconomics, and education. Now, healthcare actually has been also another heavy research topic or area, especially when it comes to Gen AI and AI in particular. Apologies. And then with healthcare, there's been work to audit historical data for implicit and systematic bias, especially when it comes to like clinician decisions, making it much more visible and more quantifiable so they can actually do some analysis with it. And then there's also work with like co-developing, so like actually having chatbots and other Gen AI technologies kind of help brainstorm nuance and context specific therapeutic approaches, especially when it comes to certain marginalized communities. And that way they're much more relevant, much more comfortable for these communities. Another really interesting one that came up was in the research was how there's been work to have Gen AI identify patients with language barriers and complex medical needs, basically trying to help prioritize them for like interpreting services in particular. Although this might have some issues, and it was even noted in the research about privacy, and I think April might talk a little bit more about the cons of that area in particular. And then also like mental health support chatbots in multiple languages. There's actually one I just found out from Microsoft supported like a Hindi language chatbot specifically for mental health. And then other ones include socioeconomic barriers. Particularly, there was one where there's been work on using AI, specifically chatbots, to help refugees with their workplace skills or even job searching skills when it comes to like resumes, cover letter writing, email composition, and such. And then also even with educational barriers, having AI powered tutors as well as human tutors to kind of assist with after school programs and helping close achievement gaps, especially when it came to math and other STEM related fields. Next slide, please. And
All right.
I think you'll take it away.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. So all this stuff is great. Technology is great, but only if you have access to it. And that's really what I'm going to talk a lot about. And just a heads up, I have a gajillion slides, but don't worry, the slides will be shared. I also feel like this is a good time to just point out, just because generative AI has the potential, again, potential, because it's too early, like Matthew said, to really see what it's doing to like help with accessibility. Generative AI and technology does not take disability away. So just because it may make something easier for someone with a disability or neurodivergency or language barriers, those barriers are still there. So you can't expect someone who needs accessibilities or accommodations to work normal, quote, air quotes, just because they have generative AI. So we need to like take a moment to think about that and acknowledge that it's a tool, but it's not a cure for, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the digital divide. We've probably all are familiar with this. We've talked about this since the 90s, but I think generative AI gives us an opportunity to really look back at digital divide to see who's missing out. There's all these potential great things happening, and there's a lot of people missing out. So the digital divide is the gap in digital technology. So that's going to be computers, smartphones, internet, and it's often tied to social economic inequalities. So even when you account for income, education, age, and other factors, people of color across the board have the lowest levels of digital connectedness. And then I put this quote here from NTIA in 1999. Access to digital technologies and internet is, quote, critical to economic success and personal advancement. So we even have, 20, almost 30 something years ago, we already knew that technology was this great factor in equality. The FCC recently has redefined broadband internet as 120 megabytes per second. So that's 100 downloads, 20 upload. In the United States, there are approximately 24 million people who do not have access to internet speeds above 25.3. So who don't even have access to a quarter of what the FCC says is high-speed internet. 27% of low-income Americans are smartphone dependent. That is their only source of internet or technology. And then we have a pretty big digital divide. It's really strongly in the Southeast, Appalachia, and then the Delta. The Delta is one of the highest levels of divide between the people who have high technology and low technology access. We really saw during the COVID-19 pandemic how wide and how many problems the digital divide led to. So according to a 2021 Pew Research Center report, 60% of lower income households reported connection issues. So that's going to be homework, job searching, health. 40% of lower income households worried about paying for internet or cell phone bills. And this is particularly true in rural areas. The more rural you are, actually the higher your internet bills tend to be. Believe it or not, Montana has the highest average internet bill in the United States, even above Alaska, which is second. And also, we saw the homework gap during COVID-19. 46% of lower income students encountered obstacles completing homework. 37% had to do homework on their cell phones. So that means having trouble with PDFs, having trouble with certain files, having trouble with, certain forms, so there was those issues. 23% had to rely on public Wi-Fi. We had all the stories of kids sitting outside of public libraries during the pandemic, sitting in cars. And the 25% of low-income students were unable to do their work due to a lack of access. And that's just the United States. So internationally, I think we need to recognize that we're talking about these numbers in the US, but we're actually really fortunate. Only about 26% of all internet traffic comes from lower income countries. And so worldwide, only about 6% of children and young adults from low income countries have home internet. And then in low income countries, the maximum average internet speeds is 11 megabytes per second. And that's going to be download speeds. I'm not for sure what their upload speeds are. And there are countries, there are countries that regularly have speeds as low as 4 megabytes per second. So how are you going to be able to access the internet? These generative AI tools that are super heavy on the internet, take a lot of power, so that gap is widening. We also have countries that regularly experience electrical blackouts, whether it's going to be the grids, there's war. We don't talk a lot about the gap that happens with equity and war when it comes to technology. And then there's just countries that regularly cut internet access during times of unrest. So this is from the World Bank. The internet has disproportionately benefited political elites and increased the government's capacity to influence social and political discourse. So we see that quite a bit, unfortunately. And this is a map here of different countries that have cut the internet, cut access to different tools, cut access to different programs. I know Kenya recently has cut some social media, expecting some civil unrest there. So again, if you don't have access, how are you going to get these digital skills that we know you're going to need to for your jobs in the future? So the AI divide, again, we're really talking about the generative AI divide, although I think all AI kind of gets thrown into this because if you don't have a computer, you're not using just the regular AI that we're kind of used to seeing. But this is an expansion and reinforcement of the digital divide, where those with higher digital connectedness disproportionately benefit from AI advancements. And it pretty much follows the same social economic factors as the digital divide, and it heavily impacts those in medium and low income countries. So again, we saw those internet speeds just a minute ago. It is estimated by 2030, 70% of required job skills will change. We're already seeing that in LinkedIn. There's a report in our resources that show some of the changes we're already seeing in job postings. Low-level digital skills are expected to fall by more than 10%, while the demand and wages, again, wages, that inequity that's fighting, for high-level digital skills will rise. So according to the United Nations, AI benefits in some regions is less likely to be realized due to constraints of physical infrastructure, electricity, access, broadband, as well as digital skills. And then even if you had equal access to the internet, AI itself is not equal. So the free versions of AI tools are less than the paid versions, and sometimes significantly so. ChatGPT has 3 different pricing tiers. There's a free version, there's the version that's $20 a month, and then there's a version that's $200 a month. I could tell you I cannot afford a $200 a month subscription myself. So, but if you want the best, you're going to have to pay, right? So there's this inequity. Even if you have access to internet, if your social economical factors, you may not be able to pay for the better versions. So here on the side, I have a screenshot from Character AI. It says, here, you're in line. Thank you for your patience. Hey, you want to skip the line, pay for, Character AI Plus. And I've actually have used AI tools where there was an option to pay to skip the line. I was using a photo editing tool, and it said, hey, do you want to pay to be the next person in line? So again, we can see this inequity that is happening. So even if you account for internet speeds, there's still an inequity. And you talked a little bit about the invisible labor. Danielle talked a little bit about the invisible labor too, but there's a lot of back-end invisible labor. So the data labelers, the people who go through and say, that's a cat, that's a photo, that's this, that happens to occur mostly in low income countries for very low wages. Also, we got to also recognize, I think, while we're here, that the materials and the environmental impact is really being targeted at the low income countries. So a lot of the mining for resources for computer parts is happening for low wages in low income countries. So it's going all the way back to the foundations of just the technology. The lack of diverse voices, developing AI tools can reinforce AI biases. People of color are significantly less likely to be involved in research, development, and investment of AI. And then less than 1/3% of the AI workforce are women. So, we're going to have all these gender and racial things still happening if there's not somewhere along the line that someone is tagging this or addressing it in the development issue. And just women are less likely to use a generative AI than men are. Even when you think about younger people such as Gen Z, women tend to still be less likely to use AI than men. And you don't have to read all these numbers. Again, my slides will be shared. But what we see consistently among all the AI tools is the United States is the #1 traffic of all generative AI tools. So we use it the most. So there's some countries that don't use it at all or very little. Younger people, particularly under the age of 35, sometimes under the age of 25, are the users of these tools. And overwhelmingly, they are used by men versus women. I really like this quote from Lee Chambers from BBC interview. Women are more likely to be accused of not being competent. They are already discredited, have had their ideas taken by men and passed off as their own. So having people knowing that you use an AI may also play into that narrative that you're not qualified enough. It's just another thing that's debasing your skills, your competence, and your value. And one of the things is, we're seeing this divide between gender with AI adoption and use. Unfortunately, globally, more women are in jobs that have the potential to be automated by AI. What does that look like? We don't know. We don't know if these jobs are going to go away, if these jobs are going to change. So again, we're so early, it's hard to guess. But more women are actually probably going to be impacted in their jobs than men. 24% of all African American workers are in jobs with greater than 75% chance to be automated by AI. So those are jobs that have the potential to go away. So if you're a Black woman, you get the intersectionality, those dual identities, you can see how they could start, really painting a bleak picture. And then according to the McKinsey Institute for Economic Mobility, by 2045, the distribution of new wealth created by generative AI could increase the wealth gap between Black and white households by $43 billion annually. So that gap that is happening because of who's involved in AI, whose jobs are being affected by AI, and who's investing in AI. And unfortunately, right now, AI hiring tools are more likely to reinforce racial and gender hiring biases. There was this big promise when we saw this rise of generative AI and ChatGPT that it was going to solve all these issues. But what we're seeing is the opposite, that they're really reinforcing and sometimes even making these biases worse. And then my final note is, I really like this quote too: technology is never neutral. It reflects and reinforces the value of those who develop it. So again, we really need to start from the beginning, have people on board during the development, during the, policies are great, policies on our side are great, but there needs to be something more front end than what we're seeing to start addressing some of these issues. And some of them are bigger than what we can do in our libraries. These are very large problems. And then because Matthew and I are librarians, we have lots and lots of resources. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so we are going to move into the Q&A portion of our presentation today. So I do believe that we have had a couple of questions come on in. So we will take a look together. We did answer all of the slides and resources that are available will be posted along with the recordings to the SRRT website within usually a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. That was a couple of our questions. Next would be, someone said they'd be interested in how your groups engage with the evidence on the current extensive harms of AI technologies and how they exacerbate many social inequities, including labor and the environment. This seems to me to be what should be at the forefront of conversations rather than the inaccurate perception that it is too early to examine AI harms. Would anybody like to respond back to some of that?
I would just say we've definitely been having the conversations. I think one of the biggest things is ways we can advocate that within our own institution. I don't think I mentioned it in my presentation, but this is the first semester we're actually offering a graduate degree in AI and medicine. So we are getting conflicting things from our university. And so it's a tough one. And I'm really wanting to hear what other people are saying as well, as far as advocating, because I see eyeballs popping up. Yes, we have an AI and medicine degree. We also have a graduate certificate. But the data centers, they're taking up so much power and resources, and we do have to think now about it before it's too late. I definitely agree on that. So I'm sorry I don't have a concrete answer of anything we're physically or concretely doing or tangibly, but I'd love to hear more about what others are doing as well.
I can go next. So I don't think it's ever too early to start having these questions. I think it's too early to see exactly what's going to happen, but I think we should be having these questions now. I think we should be having these discussions like this, having these discussions in our institutions. And there needs to be some level of oversight, because if we're not asking the questions, these tools, these companies, they're going to continue to do whatever they want. And they may try to do that anyway. So we're into this weird, catch-22, at least in my institution, as an academic librarian, we recognize that AI, is going to be really great for jobs. Our employers are going to expect, our students to graduate knowing these AI tools, being comfortable with AI tools. But at the same time, it feels kind of icky to encourage students to use AI tools with all these problems that it has, and we didn't even discuss all the environmental issues, with AI tools. So I think a lot of it is just, when I teach AI tools, when I talk about AI tools, even my students, even one-on-one, is I'm all the time, you have to look at it, you have to evaluate it, that it's just a tool. So get your answer, now double check the math, double check the answers, double check, and trying to get that AI literacy aspect in there. And I think that may be a challenge because I don't know how often we get to be part of that conversation with AI literacy and that really evaluating.
I'll just tack on. I mean, I'm pretty much in the same boat with like Danielle and April here. A lot of times, unfortunately, with the discussions at the institutions I work with, a lot of the impact of Gen AI, and particularly like the quote unquote negative impact of it, often gets kind of locked down with the academic dishonesty and plagiarism discussions. So it's like for me, like I always have to have those type of like these type of questions to kind of steer it back over, because those questions about academic dishonesty and plagiarism are already problematic for a lot of different reasons. And unfortunately too, these type of really important questions get lost in the conversation. So yeah, no, I completely agree that we need to keep asking them and keep evaluating and assessing, and yeah, define our milestones of where we want to be with AI.
Thank you. And as was added in the chat, some of today's later sessions will touch upon those issues again, if anyone is interested. Did any of you have any final thoughts? And then we'll move to the last question that's in our Q&A at the moment.
One thought is what to do, with our colleagues who are using these tools without that critical thinking or, thinking about these type of issues. And that's hard. I try to model behavior myself and have these conversations with my staff, with my coworkers, and get them thinking about the critical thinking and the social justice. But I'm curious, what Danielle and Matthew thinks about when it's our colleagues.
So I am blessed, I will say, in our library that we have a big push for this. As far as like social justice, I will say the majority of our unit, like our library unit, is very progressive when it comes to that. And we have accessibility audits all of the time. We have our liaisons working to make sure that, everything from our website to our tools to our utilization to making sure that we are alma primo. I only say this from a system side because I've been having real metadata conversations about DEI terms and things like that and how we're displaying them. And with a lot of their new AI generated metadata tagging, I've got some concerns with how that's going. So we're having conversations like that on the daily basis. So I am fortunate enough to be in an environment where we highlight that and bring that to the forefront in most conversations that we have. So I know it's not like that for everyone. So I will say that that is a lucky part of my library system.
I guess yeah, I'll add to that is that yeah, I don't think I experienced too much in like in terms of like pushback or disagreements or really like any like hurdles with the conversation. I think for like my institution and for some other ones that I work with, the library teams are very small. Like there's not a lot of like person power to really kind of like work through a lot of the issues that come with Gen AI and AI, and so it's a bit of a slower progress with that, like trying to have those conversations, and then ultimately implementing certain actions and practices. So I think honestly that's probably more where the hurdle comes for me personally, is more just the lack of staff power, I guess, to actually get things going.
Thank you all for that. Our next question is more about defining a term that I think came up in a few of your presentations, and it specifically asks, what does low income mean, both in the US and internationally? I guess they're asking for you guys to discuss that a little bit.
I don't have the papers right in front of me. I do know that one of the reports that I've referenced, I think came from the United Nations, and then one was built off of the United Nations, some United Nations reports. But I believe it's based off of the median incomes, and then it's a percentage of the median incomes, but I don't remember what those percentages are. And I'm sorry, that's not a good answer.
I'm with you. I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head. I apologize.
I think it's also going to vary from the different,
From
the many different
locations.
spots that we're all from, and different needs and different things in places. So, but I do feel like that's a fair question, and I'm sure going forward we'll all try to keep that in mind.
And I do know one of mine, the Pew Research report was, US focused. So I'm sure that their definition of their US focus, low income is probably different than the global income, so it may depend on which study you're looking at and their definitions too.
Exactly. So our current last question that is in the chat is, we need to draw more attention to the ALA values of librarianship, which emphasize things like equity and sustainability. I believe Gen AI, as currently built, is at odds with these values. Can you speak to this? Do you see options for opting out of some uses of AI?
Can I ask a favor, just because I'm a visual person? Will you paste that in the chat so I can read it?
I know it disappeared on me too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm
Exactly. I'm
sorry,
like-
because I put it under the answered.
This is
Give
me.
me-
Whenever I'm interviewing people, I send them the questions in the chat because I know me, I'll lose the plot halfway through talking.
There you all are.
So I do think there's a lot with generative AI that is against, the ALA values of librarianship. Can you see options for opting out of uses of AI? I think so. I think we're in this kind of rock and a hard place where there's this expectations, but I think there comes a point where, ethically, that there may be lines where you have to say, no, we're not doing this. Like, I don't know if I could ever see myself using AI, to hire anyone. I have so many issues with that. And I would probably, unless I was told to do it or lose my job, I would probably never do it myself.
Well, and you have to think about like how their different models are trained and the keywords they're looking for and things like that. Going back, I guess, since we're talking about interviews, that is part of my job, right? And so when I'm reviewing applicants and things like that, it's very easy to spot when generative AI has been utilized. And I think that having that conversation, I know a lot of our reference librarians obviously have more patron contact than I do as being library IT services. But I know that's one thing that they really talk about with our patrons and with our students about opting out of using AI. A lot of times when they're developing these portfolios and things like that, where they're trying to put professional and personal touches on that, because you really want to tailor those specifically to the job and the market and the field that you're in. So that's just one thing off the top of my head that we've definitely seen, and we've definitely kind of, I don't want to say curb-tailed, but strongly encouraged patrons and students to consider their use for that.
Yeah, and to add to that, like especially at my institution. Yeah, I think one of my positions is like, especially in electronic resources, particularly with the management of them, and especially with how, like, JSTOR is adding like an AI power tool into their thing. EBSCO now has their AI insights, I believe. Even Ex Libris now has their research assistant, which
Assistant. Mhm.
uh, which I'm not a particular fan of for different reasons. And even for that, actually, I think that would be one of the ways where, in terms of the question about opting out, it's like that's been something we kind of opted out of with the research assistant because at its current development, it's just not very usable. For a lot of reasons, it's not very effective. And I think you're right. Actually, I see there's a comment from Mary about EBSCO. Yeah, EBSCO has actually been really great. Like I've been working with them pretty hand in hand, especially when it came to the AI insights and how we were gonna like unveil it out, how we were gonna trial it out. Yeah, so it didn't seem like it was forced in a lot of ways, and so I did appreciate that quite a bit. So yeah, I think it's working with the vendors, really kind of advocating what your needs are, what your students' needs are, and where AI or at least their AI programs are kind of at, and seeing about those opt-in, opt-out type options for sure.
I just want to add to that if you don't mind,
Of course.
because that's like a consistent thing that we do. We work on a semester basis for our updates and our enhancements and our implementations. And August is a big release if you're ex Libris Clairvit and stuff like that. We are a I would say more cautionary tale of where we definitely limit. We put it in our beta view environment, and for a lot of our things, if we're building new enhancement features or things like that, we're having our faculty and staff test it through first on a closed private view so we can weed through all of those issues. And I know with Ex Libris, obviously you mentioned research assistant, but they're linked open data. Some of that is not as it should be and could create big issues should it be just launched into the atmosphere. So that's kind of the approach we're taking as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pop the next question into the chat. But it is, what role does research play into the ethical discussion around AI? Have there been any collaboration with ethics departments on these discussions across university settings?
If you don't mind, y'all, I'll just jump in. So our media literacy librarian has talked to the ethics department. She also gives AI ethics seminars quite frequently. And since we are an R1 research institution, it's an ongoing conversation, definitely. So we are collaborating with them with our AI working group and our board. We do have representation on. So we are bringing, I say we, she is bringing concerns. She's more in the research realm, obviously, than I am. So she could speak that. But she does AI ethics seminars. She did one earlier this month. She does deep fakes as well. We do a lot of, and that one's fun and interactive because she'll put a deep fake and a real one, and she'll have people kind of try to distinguish between the two, and we'll go through rounds of it just to get that conversation inspired. So yeah, we definitely are consistently talking about ethics and guardrails and all of the bias and the training modules and the sourcing data in these seminars that we're talking about.
Anyone else?
No, yeah, I love what Danielle said. Like, yeah, for me, yeah, even though, yeah, in terms of discussions with the ethics departments, at least at our institution, that's not necessarily happening as much. I don't think it's as much of a focus for them. Although, because of my position, I do have to serve on like, committees, like academic senate, all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm actually trying to be that liaison with about AI ethics. Because especially with some of the faculty, the ones that are either very supportive of AI, the ones who are kind of like maybe the detractors, there are misunderstandings about or misconceptions about the impact of AI, especially when it comes to the ethical usage of it. on both ends of that kind of discussion. And so I try to, come in there and provide more informed, content about like what exactly we're talking about when it comes to privacy, data, when it comes to, all the different aspects of where AI is, and even the difference between AI and Gen AI is another
Exactly. Yes.
another key.
Huge.
So yeah, so I think that's where I kind of try to come in through that, especially when it comes to those like interdepartmental discussions.
Thank you so much. So we are coming to the end of our time. So I'm going to try to get through the last two questions quickly before we just have a moment of closing remarks. So very quickly, I'll pop it in the chat, but someone asked, is there a Gen AI platform that is doing a better, air quotes, better job when it comes to equity and environmental issues?
I can start this one. I say until we see the data sets that they're trained on, I say no. And when you're hiding behind a lack of transparency.
Yeah,
Anyone else quickly?
I'm gonna second that.
I'll third it.
Bravo, April.
Fair enough. Consensus.
Were you?
And then quickly, we had one last moment question come on in that is piggybacking on the ALA values question. Do each of you feel that your use of advocacy or generative AI is fully aligned with your professional values and ethics as librarians? Can you briefly speak to why or why not?
I think that I mentioned the emotional burden, right? And one of the things that we went back and forth on with Stable Diffusion was sourcing, right? And I was not comfortable. Let's just, I will be completely transparent. And part of my team was, my undergrad is in art history randomly enough. And, we were at odds. And so I think that it doesn't always align. I think that I would hope, I should say, at least me personally as an individual, I'll speak for myself, is that I really do try to work within those core frameworks and do the best I can. The thing that I try to realize is that it's not going anywhere. And so if I'm not doing something about it, or if I'm not speaking up about Gen AI or the ethical uses or trying to bring those frameworks into conversation, it's not helpful, right? People are going to use it one way or another. And giving voice to those frameworks and bringing up those ethical concerns and talking about that, while it might not be a full answer or support in being fully aligned with the values, it gets us one step closer.
We are kind of at the end of our time. So if there are any further questions, again, the information, the slides, all of that will be posted. So thank you all to all of our presenters and to everyone who came out for this Monday morning early session. Thank you also to the SRRT team for handling tech and chat. It is always appreciated. SRRT is committed to ensuring that all of our programs are diverse, inclusive, and free for attendees. And to do so, we rely on support from ALA, membership, and direct donations. You can help champion our Roundtable's mission by donating at the link provided, which will be in the chat, and or joining SRRT as a member. You can make a general gift or select the SRRT task force or the award that you wish to support. So please help us maintain our high quality programming, the core values that sustain it, and our commitment to accessibility by making a donation, becoming a SRRT member, or helping to spread word about our roundtable and the events. It's all very, very appreciated. So thank you so much. And if you need to reach out to anybody, like I said, you can reach out to the email that is on the SRRT events website, and we'll post everything as soon as we have it completed. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.